I'd like to welcome this week's guest onto the show. He needs little introduction because he is the greatest selling financial author of all time. He wrote the landmark book, Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Welcome back to Get Rich Education, Robert Kiyosaki.
How are you doing, Keith? How are things in beautiful Alaska?
Excellent. It is prime time in Anchorage, I'll tell you that, which is a bit the opposite of Arizona this time of year. We're here at an interesting time because we are really up on the 50th anniversary of August 15th, 1971, a date that probably doesn't mean much to a lot of Americans because they don't know their monetary history so much. That's when President Richard Nixon basically said, if America owes debt to a foreign nation, that nation can no longer be repaid in gold, only dollars. And this really made it easier for America to crank up the printing press for more currency creation, what have you. So, Robert, take us back to the 1970s as far as from a monetary perspective and what was going on at this time and how that ushered in a new era of inflation.
On August 15th, 1971, Tricky Dick Nixon announced on the program Bonanza that he was taking the dollar off the gold standard. So two things happened on that date, or many things happened on that date. Most Americans had no idea what he was talking about.
Right.
He was basically breaking the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement. As World War II was ending, they promised the world that the dollar would be the reserve currency of the world, and it would always be backed by gold. In other words, the dollar, US dollar, was as good as gold. So that was 1944. And then what happened is, as you know, the world changed and Germany and Japan started shipping us all these products. Our enemies were shipping us all these products, and France and Europe and all this. And pretty soon we couldn't pay the bills. And so that's on August 15th, during the program of Bonanza.
Yeah.
Tricky Dick comes on and says, hey, adios, our promise. So they broke the contract with the world. And the dollar became what's called fiat currency, or what I call fake money.
We must protect the position of the American dollar as a pillar of monetary stability around the world. In recent weeks, the speculators have been waging an all-out war on the American dollar. I have directed the Secretary of the Treasury to take the action necessary to defend the dollar against the speculators. I have directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets. If you are among the overwhelming majority of Americans who buy American-made products in America, your dollar will be worth just as much tomorrow as it is today. The effect of this action, in other words, will be to stabilize the dollar.
The dollar became what's called fiat currency, or what I call fake money. More specifically, it became debt and taxes. And what that meant is the US government could print money and the taxpayer paid for it. So that's fiat currency. And so that's why it was such an important date. August 15th, 1971 is 50 years. The Rich Dad Company did our own program on it with our specialists on debt and taxes. I'm $1 billion in debt and I pay no taxes. And the reason for that is that once they changed the rules of money back in 1971, savers became losers, and debtors who understood debt was money made more money, and we pay no taxes. And the average person, because our academic system is basically Marxist, has no idea what I'm talking about. So most of you, I would say 99% of the people have no idea what I'm talking about. All they know is work hard, save money, and pay taxes.
That's right. And you bring up the television show Bonanza. It was this Western show that was preempted because President Richard Nixon on a Sunday night came on television to make this announcement, ushering in that era of fiat currency, F-I-A-T, meaning money is really just backed by decree or by authority of the government. And Robert, I really think that one thing that was happening during this time was it sort of reinforced this notion of Greshams Law. Now, a lot of people think that Greshams Law means that good money drives out bad, but actually it's just the opposite. bad money drives out good. So can you tell us more about Gresham's Law and give us an example of kind of what was going on around this time with this bad money driving out good?
Well, this has been going on throughout history, is that governments, because they can't pay their bills, because they're functionally incompetent nincompoops. I don't trust anybody working for the government. My poor dad was a government bureaucrat,
Right.
academic school teacher. But anyway, what Gresham's law says is that bad money drives out good money. So back in 1964, when I was a little kid, about 16 years old, I started noticing the dimes and quarters and half dollars had a little copper tinge around it. So the copper tinge was silver being debased. What it means by debased, they were adding copper to silver. So the value of our dimes, nickels, quarters, and all that, not nickels, dimes and quarters and half dollars was going down. Now the Romans did it also back in Roman times to pay for their wars. And what they did, they started shaving or filing off the silver. And that's why if you see Roman coins today, they're all disfigured. So that's why, to prevent the filing of the coins, back in Roman times, they added the serrations at the edge of a coin. So you could see that they were not being filed away. The trouble is the price of silver, a dime was worth more than a dime. And so what the US government did in 1964 was added copper to it. So as a young boy, I would go to the bank, and I'd caddy to make money because my parents gave me no money. And I'd take my dollars, I'd go to the bank and I would trade the dollar in for rolls of dimes and quarters and half dollars. And I would go through all the coins, and I didn't know what I was doing. I just didn't I still don't trust my government. And anyway, I would go through the things. I'd find all the coins with copper in them. I'd rewrap them and turn it back into the bank. And I kept all the real silver coins. And then what happens in 1965, I leave little sleepy Hilo, Hawaii, and I go to school in New York, and I had a bag full of what they call, I don't know what they call it, but it's basically junk silver.
Yeah.
And then I came home one year and I said, "Hey, Mom, where is," I go from New York to Hawaii, Hilo, Hawaii. And I asked my mom, I said, "What happened to my bag of silver?" And she said, "I spent it." And, I was already kind of indoctrinated by my rich dad by that point. He was my best friend's father. And I realized something really important. And the lesson is, poor people have no idea what money is. And our academic system is the culprit of that, because most academics are Marxists. Not that they're bad people, they're Marxists. And they don't understand money. See, Marx was a complete loser when it came to money. You look at his history, he fathered kids, but he never paid for them, never take care of them. And he borrowed money constantly. And that built up this hate inside of him of the rich. And that hate of the rich is transferred through academics today, school teachers. My poor dad.
Well, you give a great example of Gresham's Law and how about 50 years ago, we're moving closer and closer to inflation. Bad money driving out good. You give the example of basically nickel or copper being put into coins, driving out the silver coins, and then people wanting to hoard the silver coins, since that's good money, being driven out of circulation by the bad money and all these replacements for things that have intrinsic value like silver. Gresham's Law, bad money driving out good. And the 1970s then did bring in this era of higher inflation, partly because the dollar was completely removed by the gold standard. Interestingly, Gerald Ford, the follow-up president after Richard Nixon, he tried to get on top of inflation with something called a WIN campaign, Whip Inflation Now, which was this terrible failure. Part of it is he wanted everyone to wear these big, dumb looking buttons that said WIN on them. Ford was basically promoting austerity in the 1970s. He asked people to drive 5% fewer miles and waste less food and save energy and things like that. So we're really in this stagflationary era. So do you have any other thoughts or anecdotes on what the monetary environment was like in the 1970s high inflation era, Robert?
Sure. I mean, so there were some very important things that happened in the 70s. 1971, they took the dollar up the gold standard. 1974, ERISA was passed. ERISA stands Employee Retirement Income Security Act. And anytime the government says we're responsible for your security, you know you're in trouble.
Right.
ERISA, ERISA, that was 74. ERISA today is known as a 401k. And it's one of the biggest con jobs I've ever seen. The reason that's important is when I was a kid in the 50s, when the dollar was stable, it was stable. People did not play the stock market. My rich dad would say only gamblers play the stock market. And the reason I'm a kid, I don't understand what he's saying, but he had a couple of executives that worked for him that wanted to get rich because they weren't entrepreneurs, they were employees. Their way of thinking of getting rich, this is in the 50s, was to play the stock market. And back in the 50s, smart people saved money because they weren't printing it. It was the magic of compounding interest. And they invested in bonds. So when I was in school, I invested in bonds. I put $18.75 away, and 10 years later, I got 25 bucks. I didn't think it was that much, but we were trained to invest in bonds, where my rich dad said only gamblers play the stock market. The reason 74 is so important, many things happened on that date. 1974 was when the mass American public was shifted into the stock market. So today you have my generation, the boomers, and they're all hoping and praying their 401k is going to be there, and it won't be. So that was 74 with ERISA, and 74, the one thing that Gerald Ford did do is he made it legal for Americans to own gold. And up until that time, it was illegal for Americans to own gold. So it was a very strange time. And then this win, with inflation now, was some feeble attempt to stop, I don't know. I mean, as Hitler says, thank God people are so stupid, the government can control them. But most Americans have no idea what that meant. All I remember is back in the 70s, I was just getting out of the Marine Corps. I was a pilot in Vietnam. And I'd go to my favorite Chinese restaurant, and they had to have whiteout on all the menus because the prices were going up so fast. So I'd go in one day and a price of chow mein would be $1, next day it'd be $2. And so that's where Gerald Ford came up with WIN. I don't know how these stupid bureaucrats in government think people are that stupid, but we are. We still don't know what happened with what caused inflation. We still don't. So, and the inflation then spread into the stock market and the real estate market.
Yes, savers potentially were winners back in the day, but like you say today, savers are losers because the rate of inflation exceeds what one can get on a savings account. Some people have no concept that as late as 1980, interest rates on savings accounts were as high as 12%. But yeah, leading up to this point, that Whip Inflation Now campaign by Gerald Ford was such a failure. A lot of people made fun of it and they turned the buttons upside down. So it read NIM rather than WIN. And people said NIM stands for no immediate miracles and need immediate money and all these sorts of things because prices kept rising even as one's wages rose. It's sort of this vicious cycle that we were in. So as soon as people are aware that there is inflation like they were 40 or 50 years ago, that oftentimes makes a consumer want to spend $1 quickly before it loses purchasing power, like you mentioned with what was going on there at the menu that they were looking at. And then that employee, they go ahead and they ask their boss for higher wages. They might get higher wages. Well, then the business thinks, well, to pay this employee higher wages, I'm going to have to raise my prices. So now it raises prices on consumers again. And it's kind of this vicious cycle, which can make inflation get out of control. That was a big part of the problem until Paul Volcker stepped in the late 70s.
Why don't you just take over? I mean, you know the stuff better than I do. I just went through it.
It was interesting because Volcker really wanted to limit dollar printing and hike up these interest rates. Like we got such high interest rates on mortgages and savings accounts, it's incomprehensible to people today because today, we've had low inflation for a couple decades. And, a lot of the young people today, I don't really think they have any concept of inflation, Robert.
Our whole academic system is based on ignorance, financial ignorance. And that's why I wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad back in 1997, because I'm a Marine. And a lot of people ran, they ran from Cuba, right? Now everybody's running from Cuba and Venezuela, hopefully from North Korea and China, and coming to America. But I hate to say this, but while people were running from communism, my friends and I were killing communists in Vietnam. And so I was a Marine pilot out there, and everybody goes, "Oh, you weren't doing that." No, we were trying to shake hands with the frickin' communists who were killing us. But they invaded our school system. And what happened in 1989, communism fell all over the world. The Berlin Wall came down and all
Right.
this. So here I'm a Marine going, thank God, capitalism has finally won, but it already infected our schools. And that's why our academics are mostly progressive, liberal, Marxist. They don't know it, though. The problem is they never studied Marx. They never studied Lenin. They never studied Hitler. They never studied Mao. So ignorance is bliss amongst our academics. That's why you don't find me hanging out in schools too often.
Yeah, and you talk about how important it is for someone to be action oriented and not just talk about this stuff in case we are getting into a higher inflation era now. Now, about 4 decades ago, it took Paul Volcker to slow down the printing press and raise interest rates to get on top of inflation. We sure did. But, when we talk about being action based, Robert, what's something that a person can do to protect themselves against the diminished purchasing power, against inflation today?
Understand this is that Marxism is based upon taxes. And that's what happened in 1971 when Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. That was communism coming into America, because it was Lenin who said the way to kill capitalism is to debauch the currency. I'll say it again, the way to kill capitalism is debauch the currency.
Yeah.
So that's what happened in 1971 when Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. And then the second thing that Marx and Lenin said is a way to kill capitalism is via taxes. And that's history. I mean, just read the damn books. So right now, what are they going to do? They're printing. This has been 2020 has been the biggest money printing in world history.
Right.
It used to be our national debt. Our debt is now going to push 30 trillion. And that means the taxpayer's got to pay for it. And so I sit here watching our schools, they have critical race theory and wokeness and Antifa and trigger events. I'm talking about all this garbage in school, which is Marxist. Critical race theory, openly admit they follow Marx. I mean, you can go onto the website, I'm not saying anything outside the parameters of logic. Just study that stuff. So when you talk about Volcker trying to crush it, look at the stock market. This is an all-time high. And the reason 74 is so important, that was when Gerald Ford pushed Americans into that 401k plan. And so my generation, the old guys, we're about to take a hammering like we've never had before. You think homelessness is big now? It's only going to increase when old guys like me have no retirement. So what's Biden and President Kamala going to do? They're going to print more money.
It's kind of like what Buckminster Fuller told us. Don't fight the forces, use them. You mentioned that the United States is nearing $30 trillion in debt. What's the easiest way for us to repay our debt? It's to print dollars. That makes it, of course, easier.
In 1972, I went over to Vietnam. It was 6 months. I was there on January 3rd, 1972. Every person knows the day they went over because they know the date they're coming back. It's a 1-year tour.
Yeah.
And then my rich dad wrote me a letter saying, hey, watch out. Nixon took the dollar off the gold standard. But nobody saw it because it was on television. And nobody knew what it meant. With no financial education in our schools. Right. So I went looking for gold. So I bought my first gold. So I fly behind enemy lines because the NVA was coming south. And then I go to this little gold mine in Vietnam to try and buy gold. And I realized I didn't know what gold was because FDR made it illegal for Americans to own gold in 1933. So that's how stupid we are. So that little Vietnamese woman, she taught me so much because I tried to negotiate on the price of gold. This is 1972. And gold was about $50 an ounce. Today's 1800. And she wouldn't budge. And she didn't speak English. I didn't speak Vietnamese, obviously. And I'm behind enemy lines. I know we'll get killed at any moment. And I'm trying to bargain. I'm trying to get her to give me a discount on gold. And she goes, spot, spot, spot. So what the hell is she saying? And she was giving me the best education of my life. The price of gold is in spot, means this is the price of gold all over the world on this day. And so I went, holy moly. So we all have these moments, unfortunately, because our academic system is Marxist. They lean hard left. AOC and Bernie and Biden and Kamala. It's not a good time. So that's why I write about capitalism. And the way to protect yourself is go back to God's money, which is gold, silver, and people's money is Bitcoin. So because you can't see, Bitcoin is decentralized money. The dollar is centralized, central banking system. Anything centralized is communist. It's called command and control of the economy is communism. And people don't know that. So when they say central bank, that's communism. And the Fed is run by, I think, 8,000 PhDs, like my poor dad. People have never had a job in their lives. Yeah. They've never run a business. They don't know what it's like to hire people, to fire people, to lose your job, to lose your business, to lose your life savings. These are academics from our best schools, and they run the Fed, a centralized bank.
Yeah, what's so interesting, some people wonder how long our currency can stay fiat and be off a gold standard. Well, it's lasted 50 years now, but interestingly, something has changed within, if you want to call it the latter portion of this last 50 years, and you bring it up, and that is Bitcoin, something decentralized. If gold is God's money, and the dollar is the government's money, Bitcoin is the people's money. So a lot of people, they want to convert their dollar into something like Bitcoin. That might be bad money driving out good because people don't want to put their Bitcoin in circulation. A lot of people hold on to it. Maybe it's back to Greshams Law where Bitcoin is good money and the dollar is not so good money.
It's centralized versus decentralized.
Yeah.
You see, the reason I like Bitcoin, it took me a while to understand it. And I'm not an expert at it, but I understood it was DeFi, decentralized finance. So I love Bitcoin. I love anything that goes against the communist system called the Federal Reserve Bank and the US government and Wall Street. If you understand that, you'll understand me. I am a US Marine. I went to the academy. I went to Vietnam twice. I'm still fighting for our freedoms of speech, freedom to bear arms, the freedom of religion. And all that's being taken away right now by communists. Everything Marx said is coming true today. And I know it's unpopular, but I went to military school. And at military school, this is what we studied. So I'm studying Marx, Lenin, and Stalin. It's in 1965. In 72, I'm flying over the wreckage. I'm fighting in Vietnam now. I'm going, oh my God. I remember I flew off my carrier. I turned right with a flight of two transport helicopters, and I was a gunship coming in behind of them. And it was the first time I'd been to Vietnam in 66. Now in 72, I'm flying over what they call the French Indochina Riviera. And there were these beautiful chateaus, beautiful French chateaus. Man, those guys had the life, and the French did, but they lost it. And I saw these burned out chateaus along the beach as I'm flying to Hue, the old-time capital of Vietnam. And I'm looking at these burned out chateaus, and history became real in front of me. And then my office is in Scottsdale, Arizona. I drive past Neiman Marcus, and it's all boarded up. There's rioting, there's paint all over. And I said, What I saw back in Vietnam in 1972, the bombed out buildings is happening today in America. It happened in Scottsdale, Arizona. And that's why you see homelessness stacking up all over and all this. It's what Marx wanted. That's what our schools teach.
Yeah, and bringing it back full circle to inflation, if you want to call Bitcoin maybe the future of money, maybe new money, I think its most compelling value proposition is the fact that it really cannot be inflated beyond 21 million. There will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin, unlike the dollar that one can just print endlessly.
Like I said, I'm not a Bitcoin expert. I just like the philosophy. It's decentralized.
Yeah.
Decentralized. The Fed, the Treasury, Wall Street, centralized. I fought communism. I fight it today.
That's right. The government is completely outside of Bitcoin. Well, Robert, your wisdom has been helpful to a lot of people. It was great to go back to the 70s and just think about how that context shapes what we do, how we can act today. If someone wants to learn more about you and what you're doing today and how you're helping teach people things that they cannot get inside the school system, what's the best way for them to go about doing that, Robert?
Well, that's why I wrote Rich Dad Poor Dad. See, I'm coming out with a new book on November 10th, 2021. It's called The Capitalist Manifesto. I studied the Communist Manifesto. See, the Communist Manifesto is the abolition of all property, 2, graduated income tax, and no right of inheritance. Is to take everything you work for away. And that's what's happening today. So I'm writing the Capitalist Manifesto because the position of Rich Dad has always been to fight communism taught in schools. You teach capitalism at home. See, the last bastion of freedom is our homes. I'm not against Marxism. It's a free country. You can be a Marxist, you can be a Buddhist, you can be a Christian, you can be Jewish. I mean, I don't really care. Just leave my freedom alone. And that's what the US Marines fought for. We fought for our freedom, the freedom of speech, freedom of religion, the freedom to bear arms. That's all I fight for. So the best way to fight for it is in our heads and re-educating ourselves, because we've been indoctrinated into Marxism since the 30s.
Getting out of the dollar is a way to get away from inflation and to get toward freedom, which is what you were fighting for.
So I'm not against the dollar. I just know the dollar is debt and taxes. So my 50th anniversary of Nixon's August 15, 71 thing is my expert Ken McElroy comes on. We're $1 billion in debt. And I pay no taxes. Trump pays no taxes either. So right now, if I can leave you guys with those thoughts there, how in the world did these guys get $1 billion in debt? But that's what happened in 71. And we pay no taxes, because that's what happened in 71 also. And if you can understand that, you'll understand that you've been brainwashed in our schools. And so that's why I write, that's why I speak. And it's not gold, silver, or Bitcoin. Is it what was put inside your head at school? I think most school teachers are like Marx. They're angry people that can't understand why the rich are getting richer, because they're not capitalists. So if you understand that, it's, and I'm not against any of it. This is a free country. Make your choice. I just take huge risks saying these things because I've been shut down and censored so many times. I mean, you might get censored too for having me on your program, but I just want our freedom of speech, our freedom to assemble, our freedom to pray, our freedom to do what we wish, the freedom to not get vaccinated. That's all I fight for, my freedom. If you want to get the vaccination, you want to wear a mask, you want to give all your money back to the government, you want to pay higher taxes and make less money, that's your freedom too. It's a freedom of choice, okay?
You bring up debt. If savers are losers, then be a debtor. You want to be the opposite of a saver and be the opposite of a loser. Sure, you bring up the $1 billion of debt. We like to get into debt with real estate around here because we know at a 5% inflation rate, if we have $1 million in debt on real estate, The tenant services that for us. And then with 5% inflation, after 1 year, we only owe the bank back 950K in inflation adjusted dollars and only 900K in inflation adjusted dollars after year 2, and so on. So that's why we love real estate debt as a hedge against inflation, against the dollar.
Yes, but be very, very careful. I stopped buying real estate a while ago because I think the biggest problem is commercial real estate, as you know.
Yeah.
And that's where the biggest debt of all is. And so like I said, I'm driving around Arizona. We're a pretty affluent place, Scottsdale and all that. A lot of money moving into Scottsdale because people are migrating out of California, Oregon, Seattle. But it's the commercial real estate I look at. I go, who's going to, the shopping center right next to my house is empty. And there's a lot of debt sitting underneath that shopping center.
Yeah.
So that's why I caution people, just be very, very careful today. Don't assume that what worked 5 years ago will work 5 years from now. And that's the biggest mistake they leave. So I can leave you one last thought, okay? I've been investing for most of my life. And there's a saying that investors have is the bull goes up the stairs, the bear goes out the window. But there's something else that happens spiritually inside investors. When the bull is going up, everybody's happy. They could be going broke, but they're still happy because the stock market is going up, real estate prices are going, and you get this false sense of euphoria. So in a bull market, everybody's happy. But when the bear goes out the window, they get depressed, and that's a depression. And so that's what my friend Jim Records and I are saying right now. We're already in a depression. So I would be cautious talking to everybody. Don't assume that what worked 5 years ago will work 5 years from now. I was driving around with my friend, who's another multi real estate guys. And we're entrepreneurs. We own a lot of property, a lot of businesses. And we're driving around, we're looking for a place to eat in Scottsdale. This is just 2 nights ago. And we go to this restaurant, we can't even get in. Every restaurant is packed. Everybody's happy. That's the bull going up the stairs. Real estate prices are up, stimulate checks are up, kids are making fortunes and Robinhood stock trading, whatever they're doing. That's the bull up the stairs. And we went into like a third restaurant. We couldn't get in. So you have to come back at midnight for a reservation. That's Scottsdale, Arizona, pretty affluent place.
Yeah.
But the last place, Keith, was all these women were dressed in evening gowns. And my friend Scott turned to me and said, "It's time to sell." And, people were in such a euphoric high. And so somebody says, "But was it a high school prom?" I said, "These women have been out of high school for about 3 decades." Everybody is celebrating when the bull is going up the stairs as euphoria. But anybody who's lost their job, they're already heading into depression, if you know what I mean. If you're homeless right now, you're in depression, and it's growing. People losing their jobs or businesses. So depression has started. So that's why Jim Records and I, he wrote the book, The New Depression. We're already there. Depends on who you talk to. So the final word is this. There was a saying that goes, well, how did you go bankrupt? I think this was from Ernest Hemingway or something. He says, well, 2 ways. I went bankrupt first, slowly, then suddenly.
Well, we really thank you for sharing your time, sharing your wisdom. You can learn more about what Robert does at the Rich Dad Company at richdad.com, or look forward to the release of the Capitalist Manifesto this fall. Robert Kiyosaki, it's been valuable. As always, thanks so much for coming back onto the show.
Thank you very much. I thank you, Keith, for doing what you do to educate. Keep teaching, my friend. Keep teaching. Most important thing you can do today.